Hello, geographers. We are going to be beginning our Canada unit, our neighbors to the north. This will most likely be our final unit of the semester. And today we're going to start talking about the physical features of Canada. And we share in the United States many of these same physical features with Canada. Now, first of all, Canada is a very big place. It is the second largest country in the world. It stretches, from the Arctic Circle way in the north, all the way down much farther south than Minneapolis and St. Paul down here. And so Canada, very big place, wide variety of physical features. So Canada's second largest country in the world in terms of area, behind only Russia, slightly ahead of the United States, and we're number 3, China number 4, Brazil number 5. Don't know off the top of my head who number 6 is. I'm more of a top 5 type of person. So because you have this wide variety of climates, and physical features, you're going to see lots of different kind of cultures that started off throughout Canada, but it's a big place, so lots of different regions, lots of different climates. One of the physical features that we share with Canada are the Rocky Mountains. And the Rocky Mountains are going to stretch way up here from British Columbia through Alberta, all the way down into, really down into like New Mexico down here. And so the Rockies are really big, but the Canadian Rockies are up here in Alberta and British Columbia. The majestic Canadian Rockies. They do have volcanoes out in Western Canada. This is similar to like Washington State. It's similar to Alaska, where the United States has volcanoes. So there's seismic activity out here where the tectonic plates are still crashing together. It's part of the ring of fire that we talked about when we were learning about Eastern Asia. You can see the different volcanoes on the map with the stars are the large volcanic complexes. The pyramids are the smaller ones throughout British Columbia and up into the Yukon Territory and Alaska. There's a volcano. Mountain sheep. The second physical feature that we share with Canada are the Great Plains. The Canadian plains stretch up into what they call the prairie provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. And these are the 3 provinces that make up the prairie provinces. They're called the breadbasket of Canada. They're flat. They don't have as many trees. The soil is very nice and full of nutrients. Very, nice, dark, black soil. Used to be grassland. And 2 of the main crops that they're going to grow up there are wheat and canola. And canola is what you see growing here. And it is a seed that they'll harvest out of this yellow flower, this yellow plant. And the main thing they turn it into is cooking oil. They'll also turn it into other types of industrial lubricants and things like that. But you may have some canola harvest oil in your cupboards at home. You may cook with it. Canola. Here's a wheat field. And of course, what do we do with wheat? We turn it into flour, helps us make all of our bread products. Now, they don't grow a lot of corn or beans up here, and it's because of a short growing season. You look at how far north they are. These provinces are all farther north than the 49th parallel. So their summers are not as long as our summers, so the growing season is shorter. Now, if you're going to find corn and beans and other things, you can go down in this region of Canada, which is fairly far south. And yes, you're going to find it along the St. Lawrence River Valley and things like that. However, what they're experiencing up in Canada now is that the growing season is getting a little bit longer. And the climate and weather is permitting them to grow other crops. So farmers have begun to plant corn and try out corn up in these regions, and they're seeing that corn is growing better. The world is getting a little bit warmer. The argument is it man-made or is it natural? But we do know that the world is warming up. This region in the blue is the Canadian Shield. All right, and that does stretch down into Minnesota, northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin as well, some regions there. And this is an area where the soil is not very good for growing crops. It's very rocky, sandy. You dig down. You maybe can't dig very far because there's big rocks in the ground. Can make digging a foundation for a house difficult. This is the Canadian Shield. It wraps all the way around the Hudson Bay up here. Now, when you might be on the lake up in northern Minnesota, parts of northern Minnesota, or up into Canada, oftentimes you're going to see shoreline that looks like this. Right? It's not just kind of a little grassy area. You're talking about kind of a sheer cliff. You're talking about rocks. Right? It would be common to see rocks or islands in the middle of the lake that look like this. Right? It can be a dangerous thing. Many big lakes up in northern Minnesota, they have a lot of buoys out on the lake marking where you can drive your boat and where there might be rocks. And so certain colors mean drive to the right or drive to the left of the buoy. So that's something you don't find around here very often because, we don't have a lot of rocks in our lakes sticking up. But up north, they have a lot. Up in Canada, they have a lot. You can see kind of the rocky shoreline in the background. And it's very heavily forested, lots of pine trees. Now, because it has all this rock, there are a lot of ores, minerals that they can get out of the ground, and there is gold up there. So gold mining is an industry up in the Canadian Shield. Potash is another one that they'll produce a lot of. Potash is going to be used is a mineral that's going to be used in fertilizer. You have iron ore, just like on our Iron Range a little bit. You've got copper, nickel. So these are zinc. These are things that are going to be pulling out of the ground. Gold, when you think about, the computer you're on right now or cell phones, these things all have tiny amounts of gold in it. So besides being this valuable thing that you can make jewelry out of, gold is also used as a conductor in electronics, so it's important. The other thing Canada is getting into mining is lithium, and there is lithium in Canada. Of course, we use that for our batteries. You can see the different provinces, Canadian Shield around Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba. These are some big areas where they're going to be doing a lot of mining. And because they have so many trees, there's a large lumber and paper industry in this part of Canada, and Minnesota for that matter. Now, if you get up into northern Canada, if you get way up, if you get way up into places up in here, maybe 3 or 4 hours north of the border into Canada, and you think, well, who the heck's living up there? Well, they've built paper mills, and those paper mills are, they're important. They're producing paper, and there's lots of trees. So there's loggers. They cut the trees down, bring it to the paper mill, make paper, ship it out. What we're finding is the world is using less paper. We haven't used paper in this class in, I guess since our last test probably. When we were back in the classroom. So even without this distance learning, we were using less paper. So as paper goes away, a lot of these places are shutting down. And they're actually moving a lot of paper mills down to warmer climates, not necessarily because the trees grow faster, but because they grow differently. They do grow all year round, and it has to do with the type of fiber in the pulp after they chop up the tree and makes the machines more efficient. They break down a lot less. The boreal forest are the pine trees, the conifer trees, in the dark green areas up here, and they produce a lot of the world's oxygen. and they extend from the east to west coast. And you'll actually see this over on the other side of the world in like the Scandinavian countries and Russia. Hudson Bay. I'm not sure why I've got these pictures on here. Anyway, the Hudson Bay is a huge inland sea in east central Canada, and they used to run, or it still is important, they will run trains from the prairie provinces all the way to Hudson Bay. This map isn't what I want either, but they'll run these. They'll run the ores. They'll run. They'll run the grain. They'll run everything from the Hudson Bay here, and they run everything, all the trains to Hudson Bay. They can put everything on a boat and ship it out in the ocean to wherever it needs to go. And I'll have a video on that later, I believe. The St. Lawrence River is their most important river. It is going to connect the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Over time, what they've done with the St. Lawrence River is dig it deeper and wider so that they can transport bigger and larger ships from the Great Lakes out to the Atlantic. So the St. Lawrence River, it's different than the Mississippi. It's not nearly as long, it's not nearly as wide, but it's important for the same reason, because it provides transport. It would also be similar to like our Erie Canal that gets our goods from the Great Lakes to the Atlantic. Here you can see the St. Lawrence Seaway, where they dug it out and made it deeper. So it was a canal completed in 1959. And of course, even the United States, we will put stuff on here as well and ship it north, depending on where we're at. It has to close from November to April because parts of it are frozen. And of course, as this became important, cities along this seaway grew. Niagara Falls is another physical feature that we share with Canada. Some of you have been there, and it is on both sides, the American side and the Canadian side. There are 3 waterfalls located between Ontario and New York State, and they plunge an average of 162 feet, and they're located between Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. And you can see here's Lake Ontario, here's Lake Erie, here's Niagara Falls. Big waterfalls. Back in the olden days, people that were kind of probably a little nuts, but adventurers, used to lock themselves up in like wooden barrels and go over the Niagara Falls. Some made it, a lot died. Take a little boat down there and look at the stuff. I think Pam and Jim on The Office got married on one of those. An aerial shot. Lakes. Canada has more lakes than any other country in the world. You can see it's kind of like one giant Minnesota up there, really. And then this would be a physical feature we share kind of with Alaska, or Alaska and Canada share it, and that is the tundra. When you get really far north, you're in an area where it's so cold much of the year that trees and small, bushes and shrubs and stuff really don't grow. So the only thing that's going to grow is in the summer months. You might get a little bit of grass, and you're going to get moss and lichen and stuff like that to grow. But even in the summer, middle of summer, July or August, you start digging down in the ground. In a lot of this area, you are going to hit permafrost, where the ground is permanently frozen. It does not melt. Now, it could be good if you're going to store food in the ground. You can kind of dig down there, and it's like a homemade refrigerator. But about half of Canada has permafrost. Up on the tundras, where you're going to see the giant herds of reindeer or caribou. You're going to find some polar bears that are going to be right on the border of the tundra and the Arctic Circle. You're going to find that type of wildlife up there. There's the reindeer, the caribou. Yukon Territory is up there. Nunavut, the Northwest Territory. That's where we'll stop, and tomorrow we'll talk about Canada's natural resources and their economy.